Welcome back to the Brahmin Word, and we are going to be looking at, for the next little bit, we're going to be looking at the life of the prophet Samuel, and he he has always fascinated me. Um, just his loyalty to the Lord, his willingness to speak his mind, even when that goes against kings that he anoints later on. But at the same time, he still makes mistakes along the way that we will look at also. But with that, turn to First Samuel chapter 1. First Samuel chapter 1. It's really quite interesting. Samuel and Isaac have a definitely have some similarities, and not just Isaac, um, but then with Jacob and his wives Leah and Rachel and their kids, there are a lot of similarities here, and so let's look into that with the mother of Samuel. So, First Samuel chapter 1, we'll start in verse 1. There was a certain man of Ramathaim Zophim of the hill country of Ephraim, whose name was Elkanah, the son of Jeroham, the son of Elihu, the son of Tohu, son of Zuph, an Ephrathite. He had two wives. The name of the one was Hannah, and the name of the other Peninnah. And Peninnah had children, but Hannah had no children. So, first off, we have uh, this gentleman here, Elkanah, and he is in the tribe of Ephraim, or one of the sons of Joseph, and um, and he has two wives, Peninnah and Hannah, but one of them, Hannah, is barren. And for those that for those that get into scripture, when we talk about barren women, it's interesting because a lot of the times when we talk about barren women in general, it's very sad for obvious reasons, right? Women long to have uh, long to have children, and especially in this day and age, in the uh, BC time, it's almost, in a way, it's almost necessary to not just survive, but in order to pass down a legacy. And we talked a little bit about this when it comes to Sarah, for instance. And so the fact that Hannah has no children, that jumps off the page, but it also should jump off the page because the Lord has use the barrenness of women to create some incredible miracles and to bring about some incredible children that then he uses to further his glory. So let's see how that comes about here. Verse 3. Now this man used to go up year by year from his city to worship and to sacrifice to the Lord of hosts at Shiloh, where the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, were priests of the Lord. On the day when Elkanah sacrificed, he would give portions to Peninnah his wife and to all her sons and daughters. But to Hannah he gave a double portion, because he loved her, though the Lord had closed her womb. And her rival used to provoke her grievously to irritate her, because the Lord had closed her womb. So it went on year by year. As often as she went up to the house of the Lord, she, being Peninnah, used to provoke her, Hannah. Therefore Hannah wept and would not eat. And Elkanah, her husband, said to her, Hannah, why do you weep? And why do you not eat? And why is your heart sad? Am I not more to you than 10 sons? So here's a couple things. We'll get to Elkanah's questions here in a second, because there's a lot to look at there. But so we are kind of reminded, though, when it comes to Jacob, and he works 7 years for his wife Rachel, but then he's tricked and given her sister Leah first, and so he has to work another 7 years to marry Rachel, and so because of that, one, Rachel is barren. And so, because of that, there's the sibling rivalry between Leah and Rachel. And it's very toxic. And so, here, this kind of reminds me of that. Penina is like, look, I've given Elkanah sons and daughters, and yet he continues to show favoritism to you, like you have given him more children and more of a legacy than I have, even though you've given him nothing, no children, basically. And so, but yet she never, unlike Sarah with Hagar, um, she never lashes out. Hannah never lashes out against Penina or against Elkanah. She never lashes out, but she does weep instead, and she does fast. She pours her soul out to the Lord. At the end of verse 7, therefore Hannah wept and would not eat. Again, fasting is not just not eating or not doing something. It's not doing that thing, but then putting in a time of worship with the Lord in its place. And so here, Hannah is doing that. And then Elkanah asks these questions: Hannah, why do you weep? Why do you not eat or fast? And why is your heart sad? And am I not more to you than 10 sons? It, it, a lot of the time, let me just start here. It's hard to blame out. It's easy to blame Elkanah here. Like, oh my gosh, are you that one husband that has no social awareness at all of what your wife is going through? Um, but I think what he's getting at here is, look, I've treated you so well, and so why are you sad? And aren't I enough? And I could see his point, but you have to see that your wife is in a moment of grief, and she longs to have a child, to give you a legacy, and to feel worthy among her peers, among her friends, and especially in the eye of her rival, Penina. And so, and so, Elkanah, I think, means well. He doesn't really he doesn't show social awareness about it. Then verse 9. After they had eaten and drunk in Shiloh, Hannah rose. Now Eli the priest was sitting on the seat beside the doorpost of the temple of the Lord. She was deeply distressed and prayed to the Lord and wept bitterly. And she vowed a vow and said, O Lord of hosts, if you will indeed look on the affliction of your servant and remember me, and not forget your servant, but will give to your servant a son, then I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and no razor shall touch his head. Um, this is interesting here. So the deeply distressed and prayed to the Lord and wept bitterly. This in verse 10 is just the perfect example of what godly grief looks like. She is obviously putting her heart and her emotions for all to see on display, but yet it is all directed towards the Lord. It is not woe is me. It is not um, I'm blaming the Lord for what is happening. It is this. Here is everything that is going on. Here is the absolute just hurt and pain and loss that I feel. Um, and yeah, I am directing it all to you. And this is such a great example of what godly grief looks like. And then she follows that up with a vow. Now, when it comes to vows, it's important to note here that it, just because you make a vow doesn't mean that the Lord's going to honor it. He does hear, but that's mainly because he has already put it into motion, and he's already put into motion that Hannah is going to have a son, that son is then going to become a prophet, and more importantly, the last judge of the country of Israel that then sets up the line of kings, starting with Saul and then to David. So the Lord is already starting to move, and this is more just to show His glory. And she uses a couple things here, which actually recalls us back to Judges, when it comes to Judges 13 and 14, talking about the raising of Samson, making sure that he is a Nazarite, that he doesn't cut his hair. Doesn't mean that Samuel is going to come out and jacked like Samson was, but you see that there, and then you see almost like an homage to Judges chapter 16, where Samson calls on the Lord to remember him in his final hour as he brings down that house upon the Philistines. Well, here you see that, and instead of remembering me right before I die, it's remembering me in the midst of my trial. I think for us as believers, this is a great thing to pray. Obviously, we don't really believe that God has forgotten us, right? Of course not. But I think it's important to say, look, Lord, uh, remember me as your child, as the one that has called upon your name, has confessed and believed in your Son to be the Christ. Lord, remember me as I'm going through such and such. I think that's a great prayer for us as believers. I'm not saying that you put it in every single one of your prayers, but when you are really, really hurting and really, really suffering, I think this is a great thing to voice to the Lord, remember me. I think what a great thing to put forward to the Lord there. Verse 12, as she continued praying before the Lord, Eli observed her mouth. Hannah was speaking in her heart, only her lips moved and her voice was not heard. Therefore, Eli took her to be a drunken woman. Um, this just shows the amount of uh, just passion that Hannah is using as she is praying, which again I think is an encouragement, but also a conviction to us as believers. Um, when was the last time that you prayed with that level of passion? And not just you, but myself as well. It's a great time. It's a great moment of conviction for us as believers. I need to pray more like this. Um, Again, not you don't have to do it every single time, but I think it's important to show with our prayer the passion that we have for the Lord. Verse 14, and Eli said to Hannah, how long will you go on being drunk? Put your wine away from you. But Hannah answered, no, my lord, I'm a woman troubled in spirit. I have drunk neither wine nor strong drink, but I have been pouring out my soul before the Lord. Do not regard your servant as a worthless woman, for all along I have been speaking out of my great anxiety and vexation. And I love this word picture she puts here, where she takes the accusation of being drunk. Um, I've drunk neither wine nor strong drink in verse 15, and then immediately follows it with, but I've been pouring out my soul before the Lord. So instead of pouring out a drink into a cup, which is the accusation that Eli is making to Hannah, she is pouring out something, but it is her soul before the Lord. Um, and then she follows that up in verse 16, at the end of verse 16, for all along I've been speaking out my anxiety and vexation. Um, and then Eli responds, verse 17. Then Eli answered, "Go in peace, and the God of Israel grant your petition that you have made to him." And she, Hannah, said, "Let your servant find favor in your eyes." Then the woman went her way and ate, and her face was no longer sad. So not only is she validated of her prayers by the priest who is actually a judge in himself, Eli. Um, she is validated by her prayers, but she is also given this moment of encouragement and relief by Eli, where she goes and finally breaks and ends her fast by eating. Verse 19, they rose early in the morning and worshiped before the Lord. Then they went back to their home at Ramah, and Elkanah knew Hannah his wife, and the Lord remembered her. Which again just goes back to that remember me, right? And in due time, Hannah conceived and bore a son. She called his name Samuel, for she said, "I have asked for him from the Lord." And then some other texts, or a lot of, and some other scholars, um, they concede that the word Samuel also could mean heard of God, but the idea is that God heard Hannah's prayers and responded with opening her womb, which had been barren, and giving her a son, which is Samuel. So we'll see how she responds to that. Will she honor her vow? Will she give up her, at this point, one and only son? Will she give him up? But I think for me, the start of the life of Samuel is off to just such a great start because of the faith of Hannah. And just this, again, this idea of using the words "remember me" in our prayers um, is such a great is such a great thing that I don't think we do enough. That I think we should. Not again, not because we believe that God has forgotten us, but it is this calling out to the Lord, putting our soul before Him, and depending on Him and letting Him work in His time. So, tomorrow we will finish off 1 Samuel chapter 1 and see if Hannah goes through with her vow and dedicates Samuel to a life of service to the Lord. So, I will see you tomorrow with a private word. Thanks.